Elena felt her throat tighten. Alexander, I'm just a housekeeper who happens to play piano. You're making this into something bigger than it is. No, I'm seeing it for exactly what it is. And what it is important. To me, to you. Maybe to other people who need to remember that talent and passion don't come with price tags attached. He paused, studying her face. But I won't force you. If you truly don't want to do this, we won't. The choice is yours. Elena thought about it all night. She barely slept, tossing and turning in her small bed. By morning, she had made her decision. She found Alexander in the kitchen, making coffee before heading to his office. I'll do it, she said simply. His face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen from him. Really? Really. But I need a favor in return. Anything. After the gala, regardless of how it goes, I want to go back to being just your housekeeper. No more lessons. No more special treatment. I can't afford to lose myself in something that isn't real. Alexander's smile faded slightly, but he nodded. If that's what you want. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. They rehearsed the duet every evening, sometimes for 2 or 3 hours. They chose a piece that showcased both of their strengths, a complex work that required perfect synchronization. Elena's hands ached from practice, but it was a good ache, the kind that reminded her she was alive. Alexander also insisted on taking her shopping for the gala. Elena protested, but he was stubborn. You can't perform in your housekeeping clothes, he said. Consider it a work expense. They went to an elegant boutique in the city, the kind of place where Elena would normally never dare to enter. The saleswoman looked at her with barely concealed judgment until Alexander made it clear he was paying. Then suddenly Elena was treated like royalty, brought tea and shown dress after dress. She finally chose a simple black gown. It wasn't the fanciest option, but it made her feel like herself. Elegant but not pretending to be something she wasn't. When she stepped out of the dressing room, Alexander's expression made her heart skip. Perfect, he said softly. The day of the gala arrived faster than Elena expected. She woke up with her stomach in knots. Mrs. Whitmore helped her with her hair, styling it in an elegant updo. The older woman had warmed to the idea once she saw how serious Alexander was about the performance. You're going to be wonderful, Mrs. Whitmore said, surprising Elena by squeezing her hand. I've heard you two practice. You have a gift, child. Don't waste it being afraid. The gala was being held at a historic concert hall downtown. Elena arrived separately from Alexander, not wanting to fuel any gossip. But the moment she stepped inside the building, she felt like she had entered another world. Women in glittering gowns and men in expensive tuxedos filled the lobby, champagne glasses in hand. A string quartet played background music. Everything sparkled. Elena felt panic rising in her chest. What was she doing here? These people probably spent more on their shoes than she made in 3 months. She didn't belong in this world. She found a quiet corner backstage and tried to calm her breathing. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them against her dress, trying to steady them. This was a mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake. Elena? She looked up to find Alexander standing there in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He looked concerned. I can't do this, she whispered. Look at me. I'm shaking. I'm going to mess up and everyone will know I don't belong here and you'll regret ever asking me and... Stop! He knelt down in front of her, taking her trembling hands in his. Listen to me. Do you remember the first time we played together? When I caught you in the music room! Elena nodded, unable to speak. You weren't thinking about who you were or what you did for a living. You were just making music. That's all you need to do tonight. Forget the audience. Forget their jewelry and their bank accounts. Just sit at that piano and tell them a story, the same way you've been teaching me to do. But what if I freeze? What if my hands don't work? Then I'll be right there beside you. We're doing this together, remember? You're not alone. His words steadied her slightly. She took a deep breath, then another. Alexander helped her to her feet, just as the stage manager appeared to tell them they were up next. They walked to the side stage together. Elena could hear the current performer finishing their piece, could hear the applause that followed. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. Then the master of ceremonies was introducing them. And now please welcome Alexander Chen and Elena Martinez. performing a duet composed by Sergei Rachmaninoff. Alexander offered her his arm, and they walked out onto the stage together. The lights were bright, making it hard to see the audience, which was probably a blessing. Two grand pianos had been positioned facing each other, angled so the performers could see each other while they played. Elena sat at her piano, adjusting the bench height with shaking hands. She looked across at Alexander, who gave her an encouraging nod. Then his aunt's voice came from somewhere in the front row, warm and clear. "You've got this, dear." Elena almost laughed. The sound broke through her panic, reminding her that not everyone in the audience was a stranger. There were people here rooting for her. Alexander counted them in with a nod, and they began to play. The first few measures were rough. Elena could feel her fingers stumbling, her timing slightly off. But then Alexander played a phrase that they had practiced 100 times, and muscle memory took over. Her hands knew what to do. They had done this before. She stopped thinking and started feeling. The music rose around her, wrapping her in its familiar embrace. She and Alexander moved together like they had been playing as a duo their entire lives. When he went soft, she matched him. When she soared, he supported her. They were having a conversation without words, the way she had taught him to do. The difficult Rachmaninoff passage came up, the one that had brought them together in the first place. Elena's hands flew across the keys, and she heard Alexander execute it perfectly on his piano. They locked eyes for a moment, and she saw joy there. Pure, unfiltered joy. The music built to its climax, both pianos singing together in perfect harmony. Elena felt tears on her cheeks, but she didn't stop playing. This was what she had been missing for 6 years. This feeling of being completely, utterly alive. The final chord rang out, and for a moment there was absolute silence. Elena's heart sank. They had messed up. The audience hated it. She had embarrassed Alexander in front of everyone who mattered in his life. Then the applause started. It wasn't polite charity clapping. It was thunderous, genuine applause. People were standing up one by one until the entire audience was on their feet. Some were wiping their eyes. Others were shouting, "Bravo!" Elena sat frozen at the piano, unable to believe what was happening. Alexander came around and offered her his hand, helping her stand. They bowed together, and the applause only grew louder. Backstage afterward, Elena was surrounded by people. A woman in an expensive dress gushed about the performance. A man who introduced himself as the director of a music conservatory gave her his card. An elderly gentleman with kind eyes told her she reminded him of the great pianists of his youth. But the person who mattered most was the elegant older woman who approached. With tears in her eyes, "I'm Dorothy Chen," she said, pulling Elena into a hug. "Alexander's aunt. That was extraordinary, my dear. You've given my nephew back something precious. His joy, his passion. His mother would have adored you." Before Elena could respond, she heard raised voices from across the room. She turned to see Alexander in a heated discussion with a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit. The man was gesturing angrily, his face red. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," the man was saying loud enough for several people to hear. "The board is going to have questions. Your judgment is already being questioned, and this little performance just—" "Richard, that's enough," Alexander cut him off, his voice cold and controlled. Elena performed beautifully, and anyone with ears could hear that. "If the board has questions about my judgment, they can bring them to me directly. It's not just about the performance, and you know it. People are talking. They're asking questions about your relationship with your housekeeper. This looks inappropriate, Alexander. It looks like favoritism at best. And at worst what?" Alexander stepped closer to the man. "At worst, I recognized talent and gave someone an opportunity they deserved. That's what this company is supposed to be about, identifying potential where others see limitations." Elena didn't know what to say. She stood there, looking at this billionaire who was asking her, begging her really, to teach him piano. It felt surreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life. Just an hour ago, she had been terrified of losing her job. Now he was offering to pay her extra to do the one thing she loved most in the world. "I'll think about it," she finally said, though her heart was already screaming yes. "Take all the time you need," Alexander replied. "But the offer stands. Same time tomorrow evening, after you finish your regular work." Elena nodded and left the room, her mind spinning. She went through the rest of her day in a daze, folding laundry and preparing dinner, but her thoughts kept returning to those 15 minutes at the piano. Her fingers still tingled with the memory of the keys. That evening, she called her mother from her small bedroom in the staff quarters. Her mother's voice was weak but cheerful, asking about her day. Elena didn't mention the piano. She didn't know how to explain something she barely understood herself. The next evening, Elena found herself back in the music room. Alexander was already there, sitting on the bench, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He looked different than the cold, distant man who passed her in the hallways. He looked nervous. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted. "Neither was I," Elena said honestly. They started with basics. Elena discovered that Alexander had been taught by expensive instructors his whole life, but they had focused on technique without emotion. He played like a machine, precise but lifeless. It was like listening to a computer generate music. "Stop thinking so much," Elena told him after he played through the first page of the Rachmaninoff piece. "You're counting beats in your head, aren't you?" "Of course. That's what I'm supposed to do." "No, that's what beginners do. You're beyond that. You need to feel the music, not count it." She sat beside him on the bench. "Play that phrase again, but this time close your eyes. Don't think about the notes. Think about what the music is saying." "What is it saying?" "That's for you to figure out. Every piece tells a story. What story do you hear?" Alexander closed his eyes and played. It was slightly better, less mechanical, but still missing something, Elena sighed. "Okay, different approach. Tell me about your mother. What was she like?" Alexander's hand stilled on the keys. "Why?" "Because this was her favorite piece." "You said you're learning it for her. So who was she?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. His jaw tightened, and Elena thought maybe she had pushed too far. But then he spoke, his voice soft. She was warm, constantly smiling. She used to play every morning before breakfast, filling the whole house with music. After my father died, the piano was how she processed her grief. She'd play for hours, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing. The music was her language. And after she died, you stopped hearing that language in the house, Elena said gently. Alexander nodded, not trusting himself to speak. That's what you need to channel, not perfection, not precision, grief, love, memory, all the things you felt when you lost her. That's what makes music real. Alexander tried again, and this time something shifted. The notes were the same, but they carried weight now, meaning. Elena felt goosebumps rise on her arms. "That's it," she whispered. "That's what I've been trying to hear." They worked together for an hour that night, and then the next night, and the night after that. It became their routine. Elena would finish her housekeeping duties, and then she and Alexander would meet in the music room. Sometimes they worked on the Rachmaninoff piece. Other times, Elena would teach him simpler pieces to help him understand musicality. And sometimes they would just play together, improvising duets that made them both laugh. The walls between employer and employee began to crumble. Alexander started asking Elena about her life, her dreams, why she had chosen piano in the first place. She told him about her grandmother, who had been a music teacher and had given Elena her first lessons on an old upright piano that was missing 3 keys. She told him about the scholarship to the conservatory, how it had felt like winning the lottery. And she told him about the day she had to withdraw, signing the papers in the registrar's office with tears streaming down her face. "Do you resent her?" Alexander asked one evening. "Your mother, I mean. For getting sick? For taking your dreams away?" Elena had never let herself think about it in those terms. "No," she said firmly. "She didn't choose to get sick. And she would have done the same for me in a heartbeat. That's what love is. Sacrifice." "My mother used to say something similar," Alexander said quietly. "She gave up a potential concert career to raise me. I always felt guilty about it." "Did she seem unhappy?" "No, she seemed complete. Like being a mother was exactly where she wanted to be." "Then don't carry guilt for a choice she made willingly," Elena said. "Honor it by living fully, by making your own music matter." Something in Alexander's expression changed. He looked at Elena like he was really seeing her for the first time. Not as his employee, not as his teacher, but as a person who understood him in a way few others did. The household staff noticed the change, too. Mrs. Whitmore pulled Elena aside one afternoon, her expression concerned. "Be careful," the older woman warned. "Mr. Chen is a good man, but he's also your employer. These evening lessons. People might get the wrong idea." "It's just music," Elena protested. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. The time she spent with Alexander had become the brightest part of her day. She found herself thinking about him when she was doing laundry, wondering what piece they would work on that evening. She noticed little things, like how he rubbed his temple when he was frustrated, or how his whole face lit up when he finally mastered a difficult passage. But Mrs. Whitmore was right. There were lines that shouldn't be crossed. Elena was the help. Alexander was a billionaire. They existed in different worlds. Then, about 6 weeks into their lessons, Alexander made an announcement that changed everything. "There's a charity gala next month," he said, pulling out his phone to show her the invitation. "It raises money for music education programs in underprivileged schools. I've been asked to perform, and I want you to play with me. A duet." Elena's stomach dropped. "Mr. Chen, I can't—" "Alexander," he corrected gently. "We've been working together for 6 weeks. I think you can call me Alexander." "Alexander?" she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "I can't perform at a gala. I'm your housekeeper. You're also a talented pianist who deserves to be heard. Please, Elena. This piece, this music, it means something because of you. I want to share that with people. Those people are millionaires and business executives. They'll take one look at me and know I don't belong there. Music doesn't care about bank accounts," Alexander said firmly. "It only cares about truth. And what we create together is true." Elena wanted to say yes. The thought of performing again on a real stage for a real audience made her heart race with a mixture of terror and excitement. But the practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive these past 6 years, screamed warnings. "What if I embarrass you?" she asked quietly. "Impossible. What if people talk? What if they say inappropriate things about why you're really giving me attention?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. I know the truth. You know the truth. That's all that matters." But it wasn't that simple, and they both knew it. Over the next week, as they practiced the duet they would perform, Elena felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She called her mother again, trying to explain the situation without revealing too much. "Baby," her mother said, her voice clearer than it had been in months. "When I got sick, I watched you put your dreams in a box and close the lid. I've lived with that guilt every day. If someone is offering you a chance to open that box again, even for one night, take it. Take it for both of us," Elena cried after hanging up the phone. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who had stood on stage at the conservatory and felt like she could fly. She thought about all the years she had spent making herself small, invisible, practical. And she thought about Alexander, who had looked at her and seen not a housekeeper, but a musician. The next evening, she found Alexander in the music room before their scheduled lesson time. He was on the phone, his voice tight with frustration. "I don't care what Richard thinks," he was saying. "The performance is happening. No, it's not up for discussion, because some things matter more than appearances. I'll deal with the board myself." He hung up and turned to find Elena in the doorway. "That didn't sound good," she said. Alexander sighed. "That was my business partner, Richard Castellano. He thinks having you perform with me sends the wrong message. He's worried about how it will look. Maybe he's right. He's not." Alexander crossed the room to stand in front of her. "Elena, I need you to understand something. When my mother died, I locked this piano room and didn't open it for 8 months. When I finally did, the music sounded hollow. Empty. I played because I had promised her I would, but there was no joy in it. Then you came along and reminded me what music is supposed to be. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever." Elena Martinez stood at the iron gates, staring up at the massive glass mansion that seemed to touch the clouds. Her heart pounded as she clutched her old brown suitcase, the same one her grandmother had given her 10 years ago. The leather was cracked now, held together with duct tape, but it carried everything she owned. She took a deep breath and pressed the intercom button. A woman's crisp voice answered. "Yes, I'm Elena Martinez. I'm here for the housekeeping position. The gates swung open with a soft hum, and Elena walked up the long driveway. Her shoes, the nicest pair she owned, clicked against the smooth stone. She had bought them at a thrift store just for this interview, hoping they would make her look professional enough. As she got closer to the house, she felt smaller and smaller. The building was enormous, all glass and steel, with perfectly trimmed hedges and fountains that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. An older woman in a gray suit opened the front door before Elena could knock. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her expression was stern but not unkind. "I'm Mrs. Whitmore, head of household staff. Follow me, please." Elena stepped inside and nearly gasped. The entrance hall was like something from a magazine. White marble floors stretched in every direction, reflecting the light from a chandelier that hung 3 stories above them. Artwork covered the walls, paintings that looked old and important. Elena wondered if they were real. "Mr. Chen has very specific requirements," Mrs. Whitmore said as they walked through hallway after hallway. "He values privacy, punctuality, and perfection. The last 3 housekeepers didn't meet his standards. I hope you'll be different." Elena nodded, trying to memorize the layout of the house. They passed a dining room with a table that could seat 20 people, a library with books from floor to ceiling, and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a fancy restaurant. Every room was spotless, every surface gleaming. Then Mrs. Whitmore opened a set of double doors, and Elena forgot to breathe. The music room was the most beautiful space she had ever seen. Sunlight poured through tall windows overlooking the ocean. But what captured her attention completely was the piano in the center of the room. It was a Steinway concert, grand, black and glossy, positioned perfectly beneath a crystal chandelier. The instrument seemed to glow with its own light. Elena's fingers tingled. She hadn't been this close to a piano like this in 6 years. Not since she had to leave the conservatory. Not since everything fell apart. "Mr. Chen is very particular about this room," Mrs. Whitmore said sharply, and Elena realized she had taken a step toward the piano without meaning to. "No one touches that instrument. No one cleans it. No one even opens the lid. It belonged to his late mother, and this room stays locked at all times. Am I understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Elena whispered, forcing herself to look away from the piano. Mrs. Whitmore showed her the rest of the house, explaining the daily schedule. The cleaning supplies, where everything belonged. But Elena's mind kept drifting back to that piano. She could almost feel the keys beneath her fingers, could almost hear the music it would make. That evening, Elena met Alexander Chen for the first time. He walked past her in the library where she was dusting shelves, barely glancing in her direction. He was younger than she expected, maybe in his mid-30s, tall and handsome in an expensive suit. But his face was cold, his jaw tight. He moved like someone carrying a heavy weight on his shoulders. She heard him enter the music room and close the door. A few minutes later, music drifted through the walls. Elena stopped dusting and listened. He was playing Rachmaninoff, one of the most difficult composers. The piece was technically impressive, each note precise and clean. But something was missing. The music was correct, but it wasn't alive. It sounded like someone going through the motions, hitting all the right notes without feeling any of them. Then he stopped abruptly, in the middle of a phrase. Elena heard something slam, maybe his hand against the piano. A moment later, the music room door flew open and Alexander stormed past her again, his face dark with frustration. He didn't acknowledge her presence. Over the next few weeks, Elena settled into a routine. She woke at 5 in the morning, prepared breakfast for Alexander, cleaned the house top to bottom, did laundry, organized closets. Mrs. Whitmore watched her closely at first, checking her work, making sure every corner was perfect. But Elena had been cleaning houses since she was 16. She knew how to make things shine. The other staff members were kind but distant. There was Thomas, the driver, who had worked for the family for 20 years. There was Linda, who came 3 times a week to tend the gardens. They all warned her the same thing. Don't get too comfortable. Mr. Chen went through housekeepers like some people went through tissues. Every evening, the same thing happened. Alexander would come home from his office, shut himself in the music room, and play for an hour. Always the same Rachmaninoff piece, always stopping at the same spot. a particularly complex passage about 2/3 of the way through. Elena found herself waiting for that moment each night, holding her breath, hoping this time he would push through it, but he never did. She started staying in the library later, finding excuses to dust the same bookshelf or organize already organized books, just so she could listen. The music called to her like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. Sometimes her fingers would move unconsciously, playing along with him on invisible keys. One night, about 3 weeks after she started, Elena couldn't sleep. She wandered downstairs in her pajamas, thinking she would make some tea. But her feet carried her to the music room instead. She stood outside the locked door, pressing her palm against the wood, feeling the silence on the other side. She remembered the last time she had played a piano like that. It was her final recital at the San Francisco Conservatory 6 years ago. She had performed Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, and the audience had risen to their feet. Her professor had told her she had a gift, that she could perform professionally if she wanted to. She had believed him. She had dreamed of concert halls and recording studios. Then her mother got sick. The medical bills piled up faster than Elena could count. There was no money for tuition, no time for practice. She dropped out, took whatever job she could find. Waitress, retail clerk, office cleaner, nanny, anything to keep the lights on and pay for her mother's treatments. The piano became a memory, something from another life. She stopped listening to music because it hurt too much. She packed away that part of herself and focused on surviving, but standing outside Alexander Chen's music room, with that beautiful Steinway just on the other side of the door, all those buried feelings came rushing back. Her chest ached with longing. She went back to bed, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. About the music she used to make. About the person she used to be. The next morning, Alexander left earlier than usual. Mrs. Whitmore mentioned he had meetings all day and wouldn't return until late evening. Elena cleaned the house methodically, room by room, trying to keep busy. But when she finished everything on her list, she found herself standing outside the music room again. The door was still locked. It was always locked. Alexander kept the key on his personal key ring. Elena turned to leave, feeling foolish. But as she did, she noticed something. The door wasn't quite closed all the way. It was open just a crack, maybe an inch. Alexander must have been distracted when he left that morning and hadn't pulled it shut completely. She stood there for a long moment, her heart racing. She knew she shouldn't. Mrs. Whitmore had been crystal clear. Nobody touched that piano. It was the one rule that mattered more than all the others, but her hand reached out anyway, pushing the door open just a little wider. The music room looked different in the morning light, softer somehow. The piano seemed to be waiting for her. Elena glanced over her shoulder. The house was empty. Thomas wouldn't arrive for another hour. Mrs. Whitmore only came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She was completely alone. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Elena's heart hammered in her chest as she walked slowly toward the piano. Each step felt like crossing a line she could never uncross. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, making the polished black surface of the Steinway gleam like liquid glass. She had cleaned every inch of this house over the past 3 weeks, but she had never been this close to the piano. She circled it slowly, taking in every detail. It was even more magnificent up close. The wood was flawless, perfectly maintained. She could see her reflection in its surface. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, stopping just inches from the keyboard cover. What was she doing? She could lose this job. She needed this job. Her mother's medication alone cost $800 a month, and that didn't include rent, food, or the physical therapy appointments twice a week. She couldn't afford to be reckless, but her hand moved anyway, lifting the keyboard cover with a soft click. The keys were ivory. Real ivory from the look of them, yellowed slightly with age. They were beautiful. Perfect. Elena looked over her. Shoulder one more time, listening for any sound in the house. Nothing. Just the distant hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She was alone. Completely alone. She sat down on the bench, adjusting her position the way her old teacher had taught her. Back straight, shoulders relaxed, feet flat on the floor. The bench was set to the perfect height. Alexander must have his mother's same proportions because Elena didn't need to adjust anything. She placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes. The ivory was cool and smooth under her fingertips. It had been 6 years, 2 months, and 14 days since she had last touched a piano. She had counted, even though she tried not to. Would she even remember how? Would her fingers still know what to do? Elena took a deep breath and began to play. She chose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece she had performed at her final conservatory recital. It was muscle memory, written into her hands and arms and shoulders. The first few notes were hesitant, uncertain, but then something unlocked inside her. The music poured out like water breaking through a dam. Her fingers flew across the keys, remembering passages she thought she had forgotten. The Steinway responded to every touch, every nuance. The sound was rich and full, filling the room and wrapping around her like an embrace. This wasn't like the cheap keyboard she had practiced on as a teenager, or the out-of-tune upright at the conservatory practice rooms. This was a real instrument, a voice that wanted to sing. Tears streamed down Elena's face, but she didn't stop playing. She poured 6 years of grief and loss and exhaustion into the music. Every double shift at the diner, every night sitting by her mother's hospital bed, every dream she had buried to survive. It all came out through her fingers. The Chopin piece ended, but Elena couldn't stop. She transitioned into the Rachmaninoff that Alexander had been practicing. She knew this piece well. She had performed it once years ago at a competition where she had placed third. More importantly, she had listened to Alexander struggle with it every night for 3 weeks. She knew exactly where he got stuck. The difficult passage came up, the one that always made Alexander stop. It was a series of rapid octaves in the left hand, while the right hand played a complex melodic line. The trick was in the wrist rotation and the weight distribution. You couldn't muscle through it. You had to let it flow. Elena played through the passage cleanly, her hands moving independently but perfectly synchronized. She had always been good at this part. Her teacher used to say she had natural coordination that couldn't be taught. She was so lost in the music that she didn't hear the front door open. She didn't hear the footsteps crossing the marble floor. She didn't notice anything until a voice cut through the final chord. "Who are you?" Elena's hands froze on the keys. Her blood turned to ice. She spun around on the bench, nearly falling off in her panic. Alexander Chen stood in the doorway, his laptop bag still over his shoulder, his suit jacket unbuttoned. His face was completely unreadable. Not angry, not surprised, just blank. Which somehow made it worse. Mr. Chen, Elena stammered, standing up so fast she knocked the bench backward. It hit the floor with a loud thud. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have. The door was open and I asked who you are," Alexander repeated, his voice eerily calm. He set his laptop bag down and stepped into the room. "Because the woman I hired to clean my house doesn't play Rachmaninoff like that." Elena's mind raced. She should apologize. She should leave. She should pack her things and go before he called. Security or the police or whatever rich people did when their employees betrayed their trust. "I'm Elena Martinez," she said quietly. "Your housekeeper. I'm so sorry, Mr. Chen. I'll pack my things right now." She moved toward the door, but Alexander held up his hand. "Stop." Elena stopped, her whole body shaking. She couldn't look at him. She stared at the floor, at her worn shoes on his expensive carpet. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. Elena swallowed hard. "I studied at the San Francisco Conservatory for 3 years, before I had to leave." "Why did you leave?" "My mother got sick. I needed to work." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Elena could feel him studying her, but she still couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes. She had ruined everything. This job paid twice what any of her previous positions had paid. Mrs. Whitmore had told her how lucky she was to be hired, and she had thrown it all away for 15 minutes with a piano. That passage in the Rachmaninoff, Alexander said finally. The one about 2/3 through. I've been working on it for 4 months. Show me how you did it. Elena's head snapped up. What? Show me. Alexander gestured to the piano. I want to see how you played through that section. Mr. Chen, I should really just... Please. The word seemed to cost him something. His face softened slightly, and for the first time, Elena saw past the cold exterior. He looked tired, sad, human. Elena hesitated, then slowly walked back to the piano. She picked up the fallen bench and sat down again. Her hands were still shaking as she placed them on the keys. The passage starts here, she said quietly, playing the measures that led up to the difficult section. Most people try to use arm weight for the octaves, but that makes you too slow. You have to use wrist rotation instead, like this, she demonstrated, her left hand bouncing lightly across the octaves while her right hand sang out the melody. And you can't think of them as two separate parts. They have to be one musical line, even though your hands are doing completely different things. It's like having a conversation with yourself. Both voices matter equally. Alexander watched her hands intently. Play it again, slower. Elena played the passage again, breaking it down measure by measure, explaining the technique she used. As she talked, she forgot to be nervous. This was familiar territory. She had spent hours in practice rooms with other students, helping them work through difficult passages. Music was a language she spoke fluently, even after years of silence. Now you try, she said, then immediately caught herself. I mean, if you want to, sir. Alexander sat down next to her on the bench. It was meant for one person, so they were pressed close together, their shoulders touching. Elena could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle. He placed his hands on the keys and attempted the passage. He made it further than she had heard him get before, but he still stumbled in the middle, his hands getting tangled up. You're tensing your shoulders, Elena said. That transfers down to your wrists, here. Without thinking, she reached over and gently pressed on his left shoulder. Relax this. Let it drop. Alexander tried again, and this time the passage was smoother. Not perfect, but better. That's it, Elena said, and she couldn't keep the excitement out of her voice. You felt the difference, right? I did. Alexander turned to look at her, and their faces were suddenly very close. Elena pulled back quickly, remembering herself. I should go, she said, standing up. I've taken up too much of your time. Wait. Alexander stood as well. Why were you cleaning houses? With your talent, you could be performing. Teaching, at least. Elena gave a sad smile. Talent doesn't pay medical bills, Mr. Chen. My mother needs care, and concert pianists don't exactly grow on trees. Even teaching requires credentials I don't have anymore. You dropped out of the conservatory completely? 6 years ago, I was 3 semesters away from my degree. Alexander was quiet for a moment, studying her face. What if I told you I had a proposition? Sir? I've been trying to learn this piece for months. I promised my mother before she died that I would master it. She loved Rachmaninoff. His voice caught slightly on the word mother. But I can't seem to get past my own limitations. You understand this music in a way I don't. Would you be willing to help me? As a teacher, I mean. Elena stared at him. You want me to give you piano lessons? Yes. In addition to your regular duties, of course. I would compensate you separately for the lesson time. Mr. Chen, I don't think. Please. There was that word again, and again it seemed to cost him something. I need help, and you clearly need to play again. I saw your face when you were at that piano. You weren't just playing music, you were coming back to life.